start. Can everyone hear me at the back? Can you just put your hand? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Well, I'd like to welcome you all to Burgh House and to this room, and to thank, I'm not sure if she's in the room, so I'm not wearing my glasses, Gabby from Women in Art, who invited me to give this talk as part of a series on women artists and women in art. And it's really lovely to be in this room, to which I'm very well connected because I ran art classes here for years, and some of you are here from those classes pre-lockdown. But I'm not going to go too much into all of that because I want to get to the essence of what I want to talk about, and I'm just aware that time is limited for everything that I would like to say. Except that if there's one thing that I'd like you to remember from my talk is that art is energy that circulates. So if I talk about myself as a woman artist and about women artists, and I'm talking also because the title of my talk is also the title of this book, which I'm presenting for the first time in public here. Some of you already have copies because you bought them earlier and we had a private thing. But art does not have a gender, and our life in art is really about this passion and this energy that I would like to circulate with others, just as I receive it from others. I'm going to start, though, with a letter that I wrote to a newspaper about 14 years ago. The newspaper was the Financial Times. It was the first letter I ever wrote to a newspaper, and it was published, to my surprise. And it was to the Financial Times. Women artists have to be part Mrs. Moneypenny, part Harry Ayres. At the time, the Financial Times had two columns on the back page. Mrs. Moneypenny, who was a high-flying, literally high-flying, she flew her own aeroplane, a businesswoman who travelled the world, etc. So she had her column. And on the same page was Harry Ayres, who wrote about poetry and feelings and all sorts of connected things which have to do with the heart and emotion. So you get the idea. So it's not a very long letter, so bear with me. In the current social and political climate, where we in the West have lost so many of our certainties and are questioning and reassessing our values, the example of women artists and the manner in which they have pursued their lives and careers offers an example of how to deal with the challenges we face. On another note, the current exhibition of Autoritrate at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, covering self-portraits by women artists over a period of 500 years, is another example of the greater visibility now being given to women artists. Jackie Walschlager, she was the Financial Times art critic, and I was responding to something that she'd written. In her article In Praise of Older Women, which was older women artists, of which I am one, I suppose, drew welcome attention not just to internationally known women artists, but to the many who continue to pursue their careers, working consistently in their studios, outside the limelight, but with an inner conviction that keeps them going. Women artists, with their resourcefulness and persistence, have to exercise the practical and organisational skills of Mrs. Moneypenny, while retaining the poetic sensibility of Harry Ayres. To use another FT analogy, they move in and out of slow and fast lanes, according to the needs of the moment. Well, I reminded myself of that letter. It was actually published on January the 8th, 2011, because I feel pretty much I would endorse what I said then, and it's just as relevant today. The Financial Times recurs because I used it, let me see now, my Financial Times series. I have to say, this book is not just a book of paintings. It's got 88 pages, most of them in colour, and it reproduces my work, but it also takes you under the skin of what it means to be an artist, something about what it meant to me becoming a woman artist, because I didn't think of myself as a woman artist till I became pregnant and a mother. It also takes you behind the scenes in my studio, and I'll show you some images. So what I'll be showing you and talking about is going, as I say, also in the front flap of the book meanders. It takes you on a circular journey. It's not chronological, and the way it is, it's both the script, there are different languages inside, and I'm trying to pave the way for you to try and understand something of what goes on inside me, because there are different voices, different conversations that I have in different languages, because I live in different languages. And the book echoes them in a way, because it's an artist's book, only 100 copies, and it's an artist's book in that everything, whether you like it or not, is my choice, apart from actually printing it and someone who did the technical things, but had to, to the kind of paper I chose, what it feels like in the hand, the inside images, but also the relationship of script, of the corsivo, I don't quite remember what to say, or the word to use, the fact that I use red a lot, because I handwrite, I write every day, and writing and drawing are the same for me, as people who've come to my classes know, to do this. And I have to say that I write by hand every day, because you can't take it for granted. A lot of people are just doing this, and I really believe in this, not in the screen, which is also why I brought some physical examples of my work today, in case all of this breaks down, stops, something cuts out. Because we still have to have this,
absolutely,
this, and the space, because that's how we communicate if we're going to continue as human beings. And if art has something to offer, it's to remind us every day, in every way, of what makes us human. So the FT, this isn't a talk on the FT, but it's years later. I collected the weekend copies and used them in my studio, and allowed, used them for the paint that was dripping on the floor and all that sort of thing. And then one day, I didn't have any paper, and I thought, why don't I just draw on this? And so that's how a series of work started, which painting is basically black ink on the FT. This one is actually very apposite for this particular week. Frankie, my model with her floor-length hair, who's also on the cover of this book, who I hope will come at some point today. She has floor-length hair. She's modelled in this room, but she's worked with me in my studio in Brighton. I happened to notice, because it's actually by chance, I didn't plan it, that her hair is actually covering Donald Trump. And I actually wrote, Frankie's hair obliterates Trump. Once I saw that somehow there could be a kind of happy coincidence or synchronicity between what I was painting and the words, it was actually quite fun to do that. As I say, some of them just happened and others just didn't. This one, the Pomona one, was actually exhibited next door in a museum exhibition on Hampstead women. This one was from the back column, the gardening column. What does it say? It says, less waste, more seed. And I saw her, it's Frankie again, as a kind of Pomona figure. And it was the one that was selected for an exhibition that took place a few years ago. I've been involved with different exhibitions here in the past and co-curated some. And that exhibition was called Hampstead Women, but it had a longer title, which was All the Time Capable of Becoming. And that is taken from a letter by Catherine Mansfield, who lived locally. The exhibition wasn't just Hampstead women who were artists. I happen to be one of the Hampstead women connected with. I've lived on one or other side of the heath in my London life most of the time. Anyway, that was the exhibition, so you get the idea. I just wanted to say a little aside about Catherine Mansfield, because she lived for a short time in Hampstead, and I noticed as I was going around Burgh House the other day that there's actually a reference to her in one of the upper rooms, one of the books that she wrote. but all that I'm capable of becoming was used as the title of the exhibition because it was a reference to what do we aspire to in life, as women, as artists, as human beings. We want to realise everything that we're capable of. We want to do the best with ourselves. Maybe we don't remember that all the time, but that's why we're all part of a chain. If I'm something, I'm not the artist, my particular paintings I'm showing you. I'm part of a chain that stretches back and is here now with you today in this moment, but it stretches forward. And I've had the privilege of seeing how whatever energy comes from me is somehow transmitted to younger generations, people who will live long beyond me and the age that I am now, which is 71, and I completed 71 years on this earth yesterday. So I hope that that's also, while I'm standing here and able to do it, is encouragement for others, because I believe that we should be open and honest about ourselves. And this is another thing to do with my book. This book is also an examination of myself as an artist, because again, to be honest as an artist is what it's all about. And if we have something to teach others in the world, it's to have that kind of honesty. If you understand that word in its true sense, it's actually thinking about words that we use all the time and thinking, what do they mean? So just to run through a few others of these, this was another of my regular models, Naomi. That also had something, I can't remember, oh, that was another one. Ha ha! A closer special relationship. It's actually Trump and Theresa May, remember her? Okay, but art leaves on. So that was Theresa May. And this is Naomi, aerial acrobat, another of my regular models then. I think I called it something to do with markets, up and down. I rather liked it on the financial pages, which I can't understand, but I liked the fact that she's doing her acrobatics over it. And this one was another regular model, Michaela, who's now in Australia. And I like that title. She looks as though she's reading. It says, "Suppressing debate will not help women at work." So there you have it. Now, I'd like you all to just think about a woman, any woman, standing alone in her studio. She's painting at her easel and totally absorbed in her work. So much so that she doesn't actually notice that someone's opened the door and starts to address her. And that someone is her friend. And the friend says, "What on earth are you doing? Don't you know, are you all set for tonight?" And the artist turns to her friend and says, what on earth do you mean? What do I need for tonight? And the friend laughs and says, what a tomboy you are. Honestly, don't you realise that you're going to be giving birth tonight? And the woman says, "Oh no, I can't possibly do that. I've got a portrait setting tomorrow." Who was this woman? Did she exist? Is she me? Is she? This is she. Anyone recognise her? Well, not the people who've already got my book. Anyone else? She's Elisabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun, favourite artist of Marie Antoinette. And in this painting, her self-portrait, she's actually painting Marie Antoinette, and I'll tell you about it in a moment. Those words, maybe apocryphal, maybe it's how she wanted to think of herself, were written in her 80s, 18, whatever it was, 40 something, when she was writing her memoirs, which started as a series of letters to her friend, a countess in St. Petersburg, I think it was. So it's how she, in her 80s, thought of the artist, of herself, and that's what's important. And it's that energy. And I started to be interested. I first saw this painting in the Uffizi, as part of this exhibition, Auto, that I've mentioned, Autoritrate, let's find it again, this is the cover, where's it gone? Here. I lived in Florence for 16 years, and writing is part of what I do, and I was interviewing Giovanna Giusti, who was curating this exhibition, Autoritrate, which she was a director responsible for the self-portrait collection in the Uffizi, and had been working on this exhibition for 3 years. Anyway, I started getting interested in that painting and in the story behind it. I hadn't read the memoirs then, that's more recent. But I was intrigued by the very different ways that different women portray, all artists. I mean, you can say all artists paint themselves, that's a phrase in my book. And we do, we show ourselves not just in self-portraits, but in the way that we express ourselves, or whether it's through words, through paint, a combination of both. This woman looks like a young girl without a care in the world, and yet she's 36 years old. She's just escaped from Paris during the French Revolution, overnight with her daughter. And this painting was her calling card, because for 13 years she travelled through Europe and as far as Russia, where she became a favourite painter, to Vienna, to different courts, and was basically a society painter. And the painting that she's actually sketching out is of her patroness, Marie Antoinette, who was imprisoned at the time and due to be guillotined. But she's not showing suffering, she wants to please. That doesn't make her any less of a painter. She was far-sighted enough. When I say the examined life, we examine ourselves and we're honest about ourselves. In her 80s, when she was writing about herself, of the 600 or so portraits that she says she painted in her lifetime, she only rated a few of them. And she also wrote that if she'd been free to paint what she wanted and as she wanted, she would have painted very differently. Again, we don't know, but what's interesting is that level of insight and examination and what I would call honesty, because first of all we have to be honest with ourselves as human beings. I came back to Vigée-le-Brun because I was invited to take part in an exhibition in Florence called Bridges, which, I'm just showing you these different paintings because they're part of the work, where women artists, contemporary women artists, were invited to look at women artists of the past connected with the history of Florence, and to create artwork. But Bridges was an exhibition of book art, and I interpreted, I call these are books, these are some of my books. I'm going to talk about these later, but they're basically connect words and images. You get the idea anyway, where one side is painted and the other side might have a text or be a combination of text and image. So what, I had actually already started in my studio, this is my studio. I'd started with Frankie, my regular model, to look at both Vigée-le-Brun's portraits and Katie Kollwitz, a German artist. We'll look at her in a moment, who's nearer our time, working 100 years ago. Because I was interested, again, Katie Kollwitz is connected with Florence, she's present in Florentine collections, and she actually won the, what was it called, the Villa Romana Prize for German artists at one stage. It was in the early 1900s. But very different kinds of self-portraits that she did of herself. So it was very opportune when I was invited for this exhibition, and I worked on in my studio. And with Frankie, this is where I take you behind the scenes in my studio, and there are pages, these are reproduced in my book, but also to say what goes on in creating a work. With Frankie, I mean, my eyesight's probably not good enough to squint and read what I've written, but it's basically trying out different, I mean, we have lots and lots of clothes, different sorts of clothes and fabrics and things, and we're trying to recreate something. So this is how we tried to get the Vigée Lebrun look. And instead of painting Marie Antoinette, Vigée is painting her own shadow. This is the other side of the work, which actually has some of my text and some text that I took out of what I'd read in the memoirs. Well, no, that's my text. She talks about l'art était ma passion, art was my passion. I wrote in Greek, my first language was Greek, so I thought it would be rather nice to have that in gold. Letters δεν ξεχώρισα ποτέ τη ζωγραφική από τη ζωή, which means I never distinguished between drawing, I never separated painting from life. Life is art. And La femme derrière le sourire is actually my comment on Simone de Beauvoir's dismissive attitude towards Vigée Lebrun in her book The Second Sex, where she talks about women artists, and only well, I'm not sure that she damns her with faint praise, she damns her with no praise, because she says of Vigée Lebrun, she condemns her souriante maternité, her smiling maternity, referring to painting. This is a bit blurred, it was blurred in my photocopy of it, but it's Vigée with her daughter, a pretty picture of it. And for me, Simone de Beauvoir is being pretty blinkered because she's not using a sort of historical perspective and actually looking at the woman behind my little smile. And I should say here, I'll pause because probably I'm trying not to talk too fast, there's so much I'd like to say. I'm an advocate. I do also, amongst the various things that I've studied and work that I've done in the past, I qualified as a barrister and I did work as a lawyer, but I've never stopped being an advocate of sorts. I've been an advocate for women artists, and I suppose that what I do when I want to bring out the stories behind people, because I want to share what I've discovered, I'm being an advocate for them, of sorts. Yeah. Now, I'm not quite sure of the many things I'd like to say. So this was the other side. Well, this work is now in the Florentine collection, which is really nice. It stayed in Florence. In order to exhibit it, it then became a column. I bought two that I'm going to show you in a while, the column works, because I had some medium size, which are this. It's actually this size work. And then some others which are this sort of size. And this is a little boy who came to the opening, the private view, Marcos, who's looking inside and discovering the woman. And of course that painting has been used in my book as the cover of my book. Women's Stories Bridges. Okay. I don't know how many of you read German, but it's those three words are nie wieder Krieg. I mean, no more war. And that's a poster by Katie Kollwitz in about 1928, made in 1928. When I was invited to take part in Bridges, I'd already started looking at Katie. This is me working on another work, the Artemisia inspired one, which you'll see later in my studio. It was around the 20th of February 2022. I was travelling back from Florence. I had just received an email and responded inviting me to Bridges to take part in this exhibition, and Russia invaded Ukraine. And so when I thought about the work that I wanted to do, it was not just, Katie Kollwitz has done a lot of self-portraits. She, the complete opposite of Vigée Lebrun, is not portraying a pretty, beautiful woman without a care in the world. She's basically got the weight of the world on her shoulders. And in a way, I'm not going to comment on my drawing, but it's, when I'm preparing a work, it's not just what you see, the finished work. I have masses and masses of notebooks, writing that I do, reading. There's a whole process, conversations. I talk about this again in my book. The conversations I have with the many, many books that I have, not just women artists, everything, the library of books. The conversations I have with my model, who's not just my model, she's my collaborator, and everything else that's going on in the world around me. So what was going on in the world was that invasion. But what I thought was, regardless of country, of nationality, of border, of whatever we talk, we should translate those words into every language that I could. And so as you'll see here, some of you will read more of these languages than others. There were the main European languages, but I wanted to have Russian and Ukrainian, Japanese and Korean, Polish, Arabic, Chinese, all of those. Those are listed there, and that's part of, this is one of the, that's here. I might get to talk about this. But in the actual finished work, let's see. This is one side, and this is the other side. Okay. I didn't include all the languages inside the, where is it? This one. And of course, those languages are in there. And it's nie Krieg, I mean it's nie wieder Krieg, but it's, I just wanted to place the letters like that. You don't have to read them, they've just got to have their own impact. It's oil pastel on top of watercolour, and then I've written that in red ink. That is a combination of Katie's face and mine, because I had drawings, in fact, of her facing the other way, but if I'm looking in the mirror, my face is like that, so the two merged. And that kind of apocalyptic landscape was also inspired a bit by El Greco. Are you all with me still? I'm just hoping I'm not muddling you. Artemisia Gentileschi was a Baroque painter whose work I also looked at, and you'll see, let's see, oh, it's disappeared. Oh yeah, no. That was a finished work, one side of a finished work with Frankish as the model. But the idea of the work, in one way, started 10 years earlier in Florence with this work. And this work is called Dialogando con Artemisia, or Conversing with Artemisia. And it's on the inside, if you look at my book, it's the inside that, because it's a self-portrait. I was getting invited, I was doing an art residency and also teaching painting classes at Il Palmerino. By then I had moved back to England, but went back to Florence frequently. It was 2013, and I'd been invited to take part in something called coincidences, and brought with me, while I was there, of course, brought with me some small works like this, and then Federica, who runs Il Palmerino, when I said, oh well, I brought these small works because that's what I could carry, she kind of made a face and she said, ma io pensavo qualcosa di più grande, because I had and she had, basically the wall I was going to have was, extended like this, in one of the four walls in this salon. So I had 10 days, and I thought, oh my God, how can I produce something big enough? and where and what, and I've got other things to do. Anyway, she gave me the studio. In fact, there are some images here of that exhibition, some of the pages. Anyway, you'll find them if you're looking through the book. In Palmerino, the studio. She gave me 2 large sheets of paper, and I produced 2 works. I wonder if I've got, no, I haven't got the life-sized ones. Anyway, sort of imagine like that. And I started off with this self-portrait in charcoal. Where I was staying at that time, the bathroom was amazing because it was almost bigger than the room. And I had a full-length mirror and I brought an easel in there, so I started with this. But in fact, what this became was a biographical self-portrait. I collaged in these various elements. I put in that Mrs. Moneypenny article from the FT, and another FT one, because I haven't said that after that first letter, I've become a serial FT contributor via my letters. But I'm actually proud to say, I'm actually pleased and respect them for it. I don't know anyone on the newspaper, I should say. I mean, it's totally a fluke that they publish them. But they're always about women artists, or older women artists, or ways of looking at art. And I really love that. And what I remember, I can't read it now, was this particular letter was published on a page that had a letter that was signed by 3 finance ministers, England, France and Germany, something like that. And it gave me a sense of, yeah, we have a place. So that's why I say this isn't just a self-portrait, it's a biography, it's a manifesto, it's whatever you like to call it. But coming back to my Artemisia, which isn't just the painter, it's the painter filtered through a writer. The writer of Artemisia, Anna Banti. And this is another of those inspiring stories, because I'll come back to the words passion and perseverance. Anna Banti wrote a biography of Artemisia Gentileschi, the Baroque painter, in Florence during the Second World War. In 1944, the Germans bombed Florence, and the building, the building where Banti had lived, in Borgo San Jacopo, was totally demolished, and the single manuscript of the book on which she'd been working was gone. She wrote another book, a very different book, a book that she would never have written had the first one survived. But the different book that she wrote was a far more interesting and adventurous book. And it starts with the words, non piangere, don't cry. And in those first words, I read the book years ago in Italian in Florence, a difficult book. It threads Anna Banti, the writer, with the life of Artemisia, the artist. So the writer writing in the 1940s, Artemisia, someone remind me of the date, 1600s. Anyway, hundreds of years ago. They're talking to each other. And, oh gosh, now I'm pausing because some very special visitors have arrived. That's Frankie and her baby. Sorry. Thank you. And I'm losing my support. So, that don't cry, non piangere Artemisia. You don't actually know whether it's Anna Banti. She's standing, the image, that first scene in Boboli Gardens. She's in Boboli Gardens, this is the start of the book, and describes herself, she's in her nightdress in the early hours of whatever that morning was in 1944, looking down on the rubble of the city and thinking about the book on which she'd been working for 4 years. And so you don't know if she's saying, don't cry for yourself, don't cry Artemisia with her troubled life. I won't go into it now, but you'll see her troubled, adventurous life against all the odds, artist against all the odds. You don't know. Or is she crying for the reader, for all of us? We all have something to cry about, I'm sure. And we identify with that idea of loss and then of finding something out of that loss. And another thing that I always remember from that book, which I quoted when I wrote something in connection with that exhibition, and those are details. You see how important those words are. I'm actually reproducing the first pages, but I also reproduced the Italian. In the prologue to the reader, there's one phrase that I had to single out and which has remained with me, and I've translated it into English. She talks of, and this is Anna Banti, of Artemisia as being one of the first women to promote through her words and actions the right for women to work at something that they enjoyed, and for equality of spirit between the two sexes. Well, for me, that's quite a startling statement. To even admit you do it because you enjoy it. We're supposed to do things because, we have to do it, someone's asking us for it, we have to do it for money. Of course we need money to exist. And equality of spirit. We're not just talking about equality of earnings, and that is, if you start to think about it, you realise that it's so much more. And that's why Artemisia, for me, when I came to paint her for the Florence exhibition in 2022, those words were in my mind. Frankie, who's here, was my model. Together, I have to say there are other aspects of Artemisia's work that I've looked at as a woman, and because, as an artist, we're creating, recreating, concocting an idea that we have in the present day of that figure. And what are we? We're women. We wear clothes. We think about how we dress and undress. What I've reproduced here, touch, flesh, grip, cut, tie, hook, unhook, drape, clothe, undress. I've actually photographed that from one of my sketchbooks from way back when I went round an Artemisia exhibition in the Uffizi, I think it was 2010, 2011, and I started thinking, noticing in her paintings this touch, this very feminine, for me, thing, this idea, how a hand would touch flesh, how fabric accompanies anatomy. And these are things that we think about again, with Frankie, dressing up, everything that goes on in the studio. So I showed you, as I say, this is where's the finished painting? On one side of the finished painting. Here, I'm just showing you this so you can see a little bit of that flesh. Before I turned it, because what happens when I'm working on two sides of a painting, I really don't know what's going to happen on the other side. It's instinctive. If I have time, I'll talk to you about how 25 years ago, I started doing these works that were painted on two sides. And they only come together if I'm going to display them as columns, open columns, when I do turn them around like this, and you see how, again, these juxtapositions, these sort of unexpected connections. Anyway, before I was to turn it around, when I decided that this side was completed, I was about to dab and sort of showing it on my own body. There were sort of streaks of paint because I'm painting in watercolour and the paint is dripping down. And I was going to clean it, take the, get rid of it. And then I suddenly thought, no, leave those. It's as if the painting is crying. And, it was those words of Anna Banti's Artemisia. The painting actually responding to something. Anyway, so I realized I wanted to keep them. And then I turned to the other side. This is just a part of it, because what I wrote the other side is obviously the same size, so it's more rectangular. I wrote, non piangere Artemisia, don't cry. Le lacrime si trasformano in colori. Those are my words. That's tears are turned into colours. And that's what all artists do, whether they're working with images or words or both. And it's not tears, oh gosh, all the terrible things that happen in my life. No, it's all our experiences are transformed. They become something else. So that was my work in Florence and how it was displayed, so people could walk around it and peer into the open column. And this is in the studio with Frankie, with some of the finished works for Florence. It just shows you one side. This is another Artemisia inspired, but none of them are actually copying a painting. In that work, I was looking at Artemisia's works and thinking about the sort of colours she used, the velvets. That's why we were finding things that made us think of her. But Frankie is a modern woman. She's wearing these boots, she's got her strong legs, it's a different kind of figure. This one was actually sort of started off inspired. I want to use a different word, but I can't think now. There was a Mary Magdalene painting by Artemisia from a private collection, and it was in the National Gallery exhibition a few years ago. And that it's actually to here, and the neck is really far back. And I'll tell you, if you try doing that, however supple your model is, however long her neck is, it's actually an impossible position. I've got one painting here, which is based more, I did various sketches of things. This was one of the works. This one is called Red Mary. Oops. Anyway, it's not reproduced in the book, and it's not. Okay, can you see it? Sort of. A bit. I think it's got the neck. I might have exaggerated it a little bit. Is it upside down? No. Yeah, oh yeah, I've exaggerated the neck a little bit. But in fact, in the painting that we actually completed, yeah. We used Artemisia type colours. This isn't a very clear image because it's actually taken, it's a still from a video that we made in the studio before the paintings were rolled up to be transported. But it's got Frankie's hair, and in fact I call this one Divine Inspiration. She's an artist, she's more of a dreamer than one of Artemisia's dramatic heroines. So, something else I want to show you is the physicality. You may have gathered it already, but the physicality of the way I work and of these works, and what that really means. So to transport them, I roll one inside the other. This is the whole exhibition. I did it as narrow as possible. There are probably 8 works in there, because then I cover it with bubble wrap, transport it, travelling by car and train and plane. And there's no knowing that it's actually going to arrive, but it's going to be damaged, or it's going to be lost on the way, or delayed, or whatever. So I do document my processes, and I wanted to also, I do that. Sometimes I give talks in a different language, so before something leaves the studio I want to do it in English. But I did make a video with Frankie, and we've taken lots and lots of photographs, so I would have something. But what I also did in this case was I also kind of made a concertina book which showed the images in the exhibition, both sides of them, so that I would have that. There are actually some other artists mentioned, which I don't have time to talk about now, and also some of my comments. Oh dear, is that 5 minutes to go? What did you say? Just over. Thank you very much. But hang on. The format reflects and echoes my own. This is page 32 in the book. Reflects and echoes my own body, the sense of my own body in space, as I confront the surface of the paper, cut from 10-metre rolls to sizes that span my outstretched arms. I work with 10 metres. So here I'm showing you in my studio what is involved. I frequently cut myself, so I'm actually bleeding. And probably there's some blood incorporated in my work, blood, real blood. This is me weighing down the work. Here, artists' books to weigh it down. They have to stay. I mean, even when they got to Florence, I had to have at least 24 hours. I had to weigh it down to get them then into a shape where I'm moulding them. And all of these are books by women artists. I'm also hoping that I'm going to sort of imbibe the spirit of centuries through that. Well, I have to run through. This was my studio in Florence, in front of the Bargello with Michelangelo across the road. There's an image of that where language became important for me because it was the voices inside me. Can't talk about that. My artist books, which are in the V&A and the British Library and in other collections. Pregnancy and motherhood made me a woman artist. That's when I consciously joined arts organisations back in 1991 and became an advocate. I was on the executive committee of the Women Artists Slide Library, which later became the Women's Art Library. Started writing about women. Some things in my studio, just running through, secret gardens. But really, what's some other things? This was Samuela, who was my regular model in Florence. And this is a little sketch. Frankie, who's there, and was pregnant this time last year with Ludo. We haven't really managed sessions in the studio in the same way. Now there's always Ludo. But for me, this little sketch is as important, and this is something else I wanted to say, the importance of the small work, of attention to the small, because I realised when I was examining myself and thinking, nice girls paint watercolours, and thinking, even Vanessa Bell in an exhibition I saw in Milton Keynes this last week, at one point she wanted to get away from the pretty. We condemn ourselves and we restrict ourselves, but what I discovered was the right to paint the way we do, and as we do, and what actually goes behind the work, because I realised that to paint some of these small works, I'd risked my life nearly falling off a cliff, I'd been chased by dogs, I'd been attacked, and yet I still carried on walking through forests or going off on my own into places to paint. So when I had an exhibition in Florence with a small work, I placed it on a wall in the middle so that people could pay attention and respect to it, and on the other wall I had a 3.5 metre work. But I'm going to end, not with me, but with another artist. See in this golden box. With this. This is a cyanotype of Frankie's floor-length hair. And this is a work which came after this book, on which I assisted Frankie as she was preparing work for Westdean College because she was finishing an art course. And Frankie had her baby. You don't mind me talking about this, but she's here. She's made it against all odds to come today, and I really appreciate that. But it's also to show you what the future is and what it means to be an artist and a mother, but also the friendship and the collaboration that goes on with artists. Because to do this work, I've called the series, what came out was Between the Baby and the Ironing Board, because it actually is between the baby and the ironing board. And how intrepid Frankie was, because it was her idea, she just directed me. There we were in Brighton, on a day with a bit of sunlight. She prepared the silk. She's done a series of these works, this is mine. And so it had been treated, and then the sun needs to do its work, on her hair, of course. So there she is, holding the baby in one hand, bringing out a stool, lifting out the boards, all that kind of thing, and directing me. So there we had on the pavement the ironing board, a board on top of that, then what did we have, the silk, and then the hair, And before we put the perspex on top, I had to show her photographs of what it looked like. So she had to say yes, no, do a bit more of that. And she's still got baby Ludo, so he had to behave, he's a part of it. I can't remember what that was for. What was that for? The cardboard. Thank you.
I think to protect the cyanotype from exposing too early.
Okay. She knows about the technical side. Anyway, we put the perspex on top, and then the sun had to do its work. During which time, she's sitting there with the baby. Postman comes past, joggers come past, ladies with shopping, the wind might blow, all of human life is around us. And then you see what's produced. So 45 minutes later, we have magic. And so I think what better way to end? We start with one woman who's expecting a baby that carries on, and we end with a woman in the present. And all I am is a channel for those. But if you're interested, you can come to my studio in Brighton in a month's time. I'll take down your details because it's going to be by invitation only. So I can send you an email and rearrange times. But I think I've been told I've got to stop. And I would love it if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make. I haven't been able to show you everything or talk about everything, but that's for another time. Thank you. Worked. Silence? No, hopefully not. Thank you very much. I could go on showing you more things. No, that's probably enough. Oh yes, yeah. Who's that?
Me.
Yeah.
I'm interested in you talking about your voices
Uh-huh.
and how they talk to you.
Well, it's not kind of.
Is it a form of schizophrenia?
No. Thank you for this. This is one of my long-time students, and so she's not been very respectful. No, the voices of fragments, one of the things that I didn't get to talk about was how Florence made me a different kind of artist, because I have this amazing studio in front of a museum where there are Michelangelos inside, and I'm actually living T.S. Eliot's words in the room. Well, this is the voices, bits of poetry. I found myself in Florence with something that I'd wanted to do in my life, and I had a studio, Bargello with Michelangelo. When they opened the windows, I had Renaissance busts and medieval angels I could see, and on the other side, the drawing board. And there you are, an artist in the 20th century. What do you do? Because it's one thing to go to a city like Florence and sketch and admire and the art, the Renaissance and all of that. It's another to actually live there as an artist and not be enthralled to the past. And what happened was the voices, no, language, because I spoke Italian, but I found myself, it was almost like my sense of connection with anything had disappeared. And I had lines of poetry coming into my head, from French, from Italian, from English. I don't know if I've got the book over.
It's a little bit similar like an author then, who has characters arriving in his head.
It was also identity. I think another section that I didn't look at, I think that's connected with this, it was my sense of identity. And then my first artist book, I made a handmade book, was called Thalassa. It's how far inside, I think there's at least one person here who will understand what I'm saying. We're made up of, if you have different languages inside you, by which I mean foreign, whatever, but maybe not even that, we're made up. I saw a film, sorry, I'm going off at another tangent and I'm pointing to a lady who will have just seen the film and so forth. There's a film called Dahomey, which came out, a documentary about how the Benin bronzes, some of the works from Benin, Republic, which used to be called Dahomey, were sent back from the museum in France to their country of origin, present-day Benin. And there's a whole 26 out of the hundreds or thousands or whatever. And while contemporary Beninians are talking about it. They're talking in French with a bit of whatever their local language is. And at one point, one of them says, we're talking in something that's not our language, but it is their language. I could say, is English my language? Is Greek? Is Italian? They're all our language. So we all, in a different way, have these different voices in our heads. But it's also like, again, if you have one language, let's say English, I believe that we should actually also examine language. So I'm not just talking, I mean, you know, I'm showing you painting, sort of visual art, but everything is a language, a means of connection. It's just that we get used to thinking, oh, I'm looking at a landscape, oh, I'm looking at a small work. We have to kind of free ourselves, and I think maybe that's where artists, by which I mean artists, writers, every kind of communicator, creative person, they're trying to help you to discover the world in a new way. So we're trying, I'm not saying we manage it, but we're trying to get to that point where we're surprised. Maybe that's what Vigela meant as well when she didn't wait. She knew, she understood enough of that secret to know how much had she surprised herself in her life. So when I go back to languages, I'm going actually, artists, and as I say at the beginning of my book in the front flap, it's a very lonely thing we do. Not because we don't have friends or have other people coming to work with us, but we're actually alone with our thoughts. And also, there's no one out there actually expecting me to do. I don't think I would even want a patron who kind of buys me and affects me. I mean, the freedom I had with this book is because I published it myself. As the guy at the British Library, when they bought all my artist books last week and talked about its place in the contemporary collection, etc., he said, we don't need publishers anymore. Well, I didn't think of it, do I need a publisher or not? I just knew I wanted that every aspect of it to be mine. So amongst that was the kind of, when I say the different voices, I've used this red script, I've used different sizes of script, sometimes I've used black. And it's actually to alert you. That's what I mean. It's not a book that is just about, you don't just read through it. You can open it on any page and go back and forth and make your own discoveries and maybe be interested. Who is this person? Who is Anna Banti? Who is Angelica Carpy or Maria Hadley Cosway or whoever? Who are they? Who is Helen Allingham or Helen Patterson? Is that the same person? You're free to do that, but as I say, there's the voice that might be quoting someone or where I feel that I'm stating something such as I've written an article, or the voice which is even my inner fears, because all of that is, part of it. I don't know if that helps you to understand a bit about the language of the voice. Yeah? Does it? No. Okay. Anything else? Anything about language from anyone who deals with language that might be in the audience? No. Or about, no. Okay.
I think we all have voices in things.
Yeah.
I think things creep out of you all the time. For everybody, it's just how to identify that. Perhaps some people don't identify.
It's also what you decide to do with them, because when I say this book came 20 years after, these are some of my artist books. This one was produced when I was 50 copies, and it's called Dance, Dreams and Journeys, Fragments of a Life. And the gentleman at the British Library, actually, he said, oh, it's almost like an album of greatest hits. And in fact, to make this book, well, it is actually, this isn't to sort of belittle it at all. When I made this book, I thought 20 years ago, I was thinking, what's the kind of most important aspect of my work that I wanted to make 50 copies for my 50th. And it's hand-bound in Florence. I went through and I thought, it's my sketchbooks. They're the most intimate part, and I've been keeping them for decades. And so I went through hundreds of books. I went through double the number of images that there are here to make the selections I did. But essentially, they're not, apart from what I say at the outset about to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a flower, wild flower, and whatever else I say of my own, they reproduce my paintings and my texts from sketchbooks, and I put it into sections. Well, the interesting thing for me is that 20 years on, what I've done with this book is I'm examining much more. For me, it's something that's more interesting. Well, not more interesting. They all have their place, because I think that's a beautiful book. Other books I've got more of a story. They're to do with fear. They're a expression of psychological states I'm talking about. But this one, as I say, is examining. Well, it's reflecting on women. Well, it's something of the stories that I've given you. Stories of passion and perseverance. Another book, well, this is a very special book as well, A Walk in the Woods. The Walk in the Woods is actually to do with my fears, but it talks about something that was a very important moment for me when I was examining nice girls paint watercolours. That was the phrase going on in my mind. Is it just a nice thing? The way Vanessa Bell said, oh, the pretty. And then I went beyond that kind of niceness because, as I say, I then thought, behind the watercolour sunsets, beyond the pinky mauves of misty dawns, the watercolour sunsets that nice girls do, lies the colour of fear. And I reproduced, in a way, I mean, the images that I reproduced, it's like an alternative exhibition, because this is a very big charcoal drawing. I created another artwork out of this book. So I put the lies the colour of fear, a tightness in the chest, a hand at the throat, the barely suppressed, and then scream in great big letters. I think I've got it. It sort of plays with words, but the words actually become here. Just a minute. Oh yeah, you can see it. These are pages from the book. The way it plays with, because there are layers and layers. So the book goes through layers. So then I talk about Red Riding Hood in the forest, fears, about women's identity, about how ideas about. I'm going on. I think it's too much. I think that's enough. That's enough anyway. Thank you. Thanks for saying. Who invited me. Don't know if you were there at the beginning when I was glad to have this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks to everyone.